it will probably record what's ever on your screen.
Hello everyone, this is Çiğdem Knebel. Welcome to 2017 Parents Dyslexia Summit. Our guest today is Kathy Johnson. She's the founder of Pyramid of Potential. She trains parents and professionals on how to improve brain functioning through her webinars and professional development workshops. When I came across Kathy's YouTube videos, I was intrigued to learn about brain advancement and how retained primitive reflexes could affect the brain. So if you have not found her online yet, I wanted to introduce her to you. So welcome, Kathy. Thank you for joining the summit.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really pleased to be here and able to share my the information that I have learned over the last, almost 20 years with all of your parents and other people who have joined. So hi, everybody.
So the one thing that I believe that differentiates you from anybody out there is that when I watch your videos, I thought they were very easy to understand as a parent who had no idea what primitive reflexes were and how they could affect a child or even grown-ups if they were retained. And your videos and your method of teaching was applicable to us, and it was very easy to understand. So I wanted to make sure that you're part of the summit because brain advancement has been a big part of our journey. And I want to jump into primitive reflexes. Maybe you can explain what they are and how they affect the brain and the child if they're retained, and how parents could help their children to eliminate them as as a part of their daily routine.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And let me start with dyslexia, because that's why you're here.
Yes.
You're here because your child has dyslexia. Dyslexia is a developmental thing. People don't suddenly get dyslexia when they're in second grade or, when they're 12 or something like that. They've had it since they were very young, and you don't know when it actually started. But what you do know is that they have acted in certain ways since they were babies. And we also know that dyslexia, because of the fMRIs, is in the brain and has to do with parts of the brain that have been developed or have not been, that it's more in one part of the brain than the other. So we know it is in the brain. So the time when the brain has the most development, I want you to think about that. When was it that your child had the most development? The single year. And if you came up with the first year of life, that's what I would agree with. That when your child was born, it was completely helpless, right? You'd hold your baby and they couldn't do very much, but by the time they're a year old, they can communicate, they can feed themselves, and they can motor around. A lot of body development, but also brain development has happened during that first year of life. You know about stages of development because your pediatrician talked about it, and it's something that you follow and you keep in their baby book and you're watching. Well, those stages of development have a fancy name called primitive reflexes. That's it. So it seems like, ooh, what are these primitive reflexes and all these fancy things? Well, they're simply stages of development. So as a quick overview, I want you to think about when your baby was about 4 months old, and when you put your baby on the floor on their tummy, what does the baby do? Automatically holds up his head, holds up his shoulders and arms and his legs, and balances there. Now, when my babies, and I've got 3 babies, they're in their 20s now, but when they were 4 months old, I was so proud of them for being so strong because they could hold up their bodies. But I was wrong. It wasn't strength that held that up. It was actually a reflex that they could not help, that they did automatically. This particular primitive reflex is called the Tonic Labyrinthine reflex. And I'll go over these different reflexes with you in a little bit and tell you more about them. But this particular one, physically, is there to increase the muscles in the neck, the back, and the shoulders. See, when babies are born, they have not so many muscles there. And it's through being on the floor and doing tummy time that they would hold their heads up and build those muscles. So that's what's going on in the body. But what we're here for is what's going on in the brain. And it turns out that the tonic labyrinthine reflex, this stage of development, is when the brain gets set up for things like sequencing. Now, I want you to think about what is sequencing all about. When do we need it? Well, in dyslexia, we need it to keep the sounds in order, or when we're writing, the letters in order. It also, though, is related to other things like telling time, because time is actually the sequence of moment to moment. And so being able to tell time using an analog clock is different than being able to tell time with a digital clock, because with a digital clock, all we're doing is saying numbers and using math to figure out what time it is and how much time we have from here to there. So if your child has poor posture, okay, it's always holding their head up, you know, just doesn't have much strength, doesn't like to do, you know, things that we use our upper body for, and if at the same time they have problems with sequencing, okay, and this might be just not being able to say the word dyslexia, okay, because it's a complicated word, it's long, it's got all these different syllables, and so it's a difficult word to say. You are probably looking at what's called a retained tonic labyrinthine reflex, okay? Retained means they still have it. Now, the opposite of retained means that it is integrated, that this reflex has gone into our body and is no longer constantly present. Retained means it's constantly present. But these reflexes are not either retained or integrated. They actually are on a continuum, okay? So that most of us do eventually get through our reflexes somewhat, and by the time we are a year and a half old, we are standing up and walking. That does not mean, though, that our reflexes are fully integrated. It means they're partial, it could mean that they're partially integrated. So what's really interesting is once we get past this year, this 1 year mark, doesn't mean that it's the end. It doesn't mean that we have to live with these retained reflexes for the rest of our lives. We can integrate our reflexes at any time. The reason that we know that is through that word neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity means that you can change your brain at any time, okay, at any stage, with the right amount of work, consistent work, and over the right amount of time. So that's a little bit of a primer on what are primitive reflexes and what can we do about them. I want to give you just a little bit more and tell you a little bit about myself. So I learned about primitive reflexes 17 years ago. 17 years ago, I learned about them as I was doing brain training and reading tutoring and things like that. So that if the reading tutoring wasn't working, I was like such a perfectionist that I had to go out and figure out, all right, what's holding them back. And as I learned about primitive reflexes, I learned that I retained all of mine. Now, this just means that none of us are perfect, and our goal is not perfection. Okay, so even though, you know, you've got a child, or we might even be talking about yourself, that, oh, there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with my child. All we need to do is get you to the point where you're progressing, you're learning, that you're successful in what you can do. You see, I integrated my reflexes and went through other brain training starting at age 54. So we're talking 6 years ago when I did a lot of this stuff. And wow, the improvement is amazing. I love that I was able to be successful in my life despite having this. I was actually a pretty good student in school. It was where I fit. There were other things that I was not great at. My coordination, I'm sure I had an auditory processing disorder. I know I had a visual processing problem because I have done vision therapy, and I know that I had certain cognitive skills that were not great. So anyway, that's just about me, and that's to help you know that no matter what age, you can change your brain and you can improve.
Yeah, I can tell you that I have tried a lot of the exercises on myself as well, and I've seen quite a few improvements on myself, and that's just fantastic to feel that difference. And it's also part of the experience that I know what my children were going through. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's harder for them to verbalize how they feel. And when we were doing the exercises together, my goal wasn't to improve mine, but as I started feeling that, oh my God, I can do this better, you know, I can have finer and better fine motor skills, or my hand-eye coordination is getting better. It was amazing.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, that's so great. It's so great to hear from you, and that you also had done that. Congratulations. Because one of the things that I'd like to talk about next is how to make primitive reflex integration work.
Yeah.
In order to make a change in your brain, it's the same as making a habit. And not everybody is successful at this because it takes dedication. And so something that you noticed was that how you have to be dedicated in order for your children to get through this. You have to be dedicated for yourself, which is even harder to follow through with yourself. So the way that I recommend people to do their primitive reflex integration is to use a DVD, and I'm just going to shamelessly share this. And Tig Dom said that I could, and so that's okay. So this is a this is a DVD, but it also comes in a download and a flash drive called Maintaining Brains Every Day, and it's very inexpensive. We made it so that anybody can afford it. All right, it's $35 for the DVD or the flash drive, or $20 for a download. So my suggestion is that you follow this DVD. It's 15 minutes. That's all, 15 minutes. But you got to do it every day. And just like a habit, it's got to be done consistently for a period of time. So at the minimum, we're talking 30 days, okay, at the minimum, all right? And if you did this DVD for 30 days, chances are very, very good. We've got high percent of success rate for at least making changes for that 30 days. It's not a silver bullet, guys. There is no such thing as a silver bullet. I'm not here to say, oh, this is it, and all that kind of stuff. No, it's a huge piece because it's going back to infancy, all right? And so it explains reflex integration, explains why dyslexia is there and why this has to be done first, but you still have to do those other things.
So you said it should be done at least 30 days. Can it be done maybe like 2 weeks and then you take a break and then start all over again, or would you lose everything you have gained in that period?
Good question. Good question. The way I would explain it to my parents, because they would ask the exact same question. You know, what if we miss a day or something? I would tell them, if you miss a day, add 2 to the end. If you miss a week, start over. Okay? Start that 30 days over. Is that like exact? And the answer is no. Everybody's different. You may slide in that time, but it doesn't mean that you've completely ruined everything. However, by giving that information and that suggestion, what I find is that parents will follow through, okay? Because they don't want this to last forever. Now this, in the 30 days, you will see improvement. You'll see improvement in, well, I will give you in a few minutes what happens with each of the reflexes. But you'll see a lot of improvements, but in 30 days, is that enough to get over dyslexia and to integrate all of these reflexes? And the answer is no, no. However, if you were to continue this for 6 months, that would be optimal. And you would probably get full integration of all of the reflexes that I share. There are 6 that I share on this video. And so that would be significant. And that's my suggestion. However, we are human. And I understand. I am a parent, and I understand how difficult it can be, especially when it's boring. And these 15 minutes, they're very regimented. You're following a video and doing the exercises along with the video. After a while, you might decide to not use the video. That's fine. But they're the same. I do these exercises in the morning because I need to continue. Let me also add in a little bit about age. When we turn 40, something happens to our brain and certain things don't work as well. We don't hear as well, we don't see as well, we don't remember as well. And what I believe is happening, and I've seen some research about this, not a ton, but a little, that these reflexes start coming back. So that by the time, if we live really long and we die really old, we look an awful lot like we did when we were infants. So, so about the time that you're 40 and you're starting to notice these things, that's because these reflexes may be disintegrating. And so what I suggest for anyone who's over 40 is to do these reflex exercises every day. And so therefore I do, but I'm also human and not perfect. And so sometimes I let a month lapse, and I can tell you that in a month, things change. I'm a pretty fast typer, and normally when I'm typing, I can just type really fast and everything's great. But if my reflexes, I haven't been doing them for a month, I start to notice that I'm typing along and I make many more typos. My memory won't be as good. Yeah, a couple other subtle things, but they're usually enough to say, okay, back to my reflexes. You know, I've got it. I know this information. I should be able to do these every day, but I also find that if I don't do them before my cup of coffee, I'm done. The day starts, I've had my coffee, off I go, and I never do them. So I have to do them.
It's just like the gym, right? You can build your muscles and you don't go for a month, you start feeling weak and you don't have that much energy, and you go back to the gym, and in a few days you start getting into the groove of things and you're back on track.
Absolutely.
It's just training the brain or the physical body, it's all the same.
Yes, yes, it really is. It's all the same. So did I do enough explanation and background?
I believe so, yes. Maybe we can now go into specific reflexes and
Okay.
what are the symptoms that parents should be looking for, and
Okay.
and what are the benefits they will see once the reflexes are integrated.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So I have a cheat sheet that will help me so that I don't forget anything. the first reflex we're going to talk about is the Moro reflex. So when a baby is young, firstborn, okay, and you drop them a little bit or blow in their face, they go like that. And so that's the Moro reflex. This has to do with fight or flight, because this is fight or flight. If something traumatic happens to you, even if it's integrated, you still go, all right?
That's me.
Oh, okay. And so this is not a great thing. This is not a great thing to have and have all the time, because then when small things happen, okay, somebody bumps into you, you might go into fight or flight, which means that a young child who hasn't matured enough to like hold his reactions might fight and run.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't want that. That's not good. It's not a good thing. So the most important reflex that I am concerned, that I believe exists, is this Moro reflex. I also, from my experience over the last, like I said, 17 years, is that if the Moro reflex is still present, that it's retained, that it can hold, it's so strong, it can hold back everything else, right? So that you really want this particular one to be integrated. I'm going to give you the name of a YouTube video that you can go watch and see how to integrate this one, all right? Because it's so important, I want the whole world to know about it.
We'll add the link into the video as well, so people can have access to these.
Please do. Oh, thank you. So the name of the video is called The Best Moro, and Moro is spelled M-O-R-O, The Best Moro Reflex Integration Exercise. Reason I put it out there is there are other reflex exercises for integration of the Moro that my mentor had told me that some of these, because of the reaction, can actually delay the integration. So I explain it. I explain why, and then I show how to do it. So let me tell you what the symptoms are if this has been retained, and that way you'll know if it's going to be something that you really need to take a look at. So Moro reflex has a lot. Motion sickness, poor balance and coordination, physically timid, poor stamina, hyperactivity followed by fatigue, visual problems such as fixation, which is unable to keep eyes on an object for 10 or more seconds, excessive blinking, doesn't maintain eye contact, light hypersensitivity, like very sensitive to when it's a very bright environment, auditory hypersensitivity, such as they hear better than others, allergies to food, environment, or drugs, hypoglycemia, where they may be hyperactive or have poor concentration after eating sugary foods or 4 hours after eating because their blood sugar is high or low. Anxiety, we can be talking about test anxiety or separation anxiety or even general anxiety. Mood swings, difficulty accepting criticism, dislike of change, emotionally sensitive. And finally, one that I have seen fairly consistently, and then I've seen through integration of the Moro reflex that it has improved, is math difficulties. And specifically, the ability to have logic and reasoning. And somebody who does not is a very concrete thinker. Now, I want to talk a little bit about dyslexia here and how it relates to the Moro reflex. So one type of dyslexia is the visual dyslexia. And this would be the visual type where when somebody looks at a piece of paper or a book with a white background and black lettering, that the black lettering might be double, it might visually shake lift off the page, okay? It might have sparks coming in and out. Now, this has a lot to do with light hypersensitivity, okay? And so here it was, one of the symptoms is light hypersensitivity. This is related to scotopic sensitivity syndrome, which is also called Erlin syndrome. And this is the one where colored overlays are used and suddenly somebody can read a lot better. I always test when I'm working with somebody for color and for whether or not the overlays will help. And in a significant, about 40% of the cases, yes, the color helps significantly. And then what I'll have is like suddenly the parents come in a few months later and they're saying that their child won't use the overlay. So I ask the child, why aren't you using the overlay? And the child looks at me and says, I don't need it anymore. And I believe the child because we have a really good relationship. So recently I had a 15-year-old, very mature young man who I was working with. And when we started, he needed a very, very dark color, dark blue, in order to be able to see and for the words to not vibrate. And after 4 weeks of doing, integrating the Moro Reflex, he then was able to, I tested him to see if it had changed, and he was able to get it to stop with only a light blue. So his vision was changing. His hypersensitivity was changing. And then 2 weeks later, because every week I would ask, have you seen any improvements? 2 weeks later, he walks in and he says, I know what my improvement is. I say, what? He says, I don't need the overlays anymore. Okay, so in 6 weeks, he was able to overcome a type of dyslexia, the visual dyslexia. You can see how powerful this could be. So that's the Moro Reflex. Did you have any questions for me?
This is great, thank you.
Okay. The next one is the Tonic Labyrinthine Reflex, which I had mentioned before. So if this is retained, we might see poor posture, a weak muscle tone. Okay, that's the, didn't develop those muscles. Poor sense of balance. Now, balance comes up a lot through these. This is what the OTs and PTs will call the vestibular system. So when we were looking at the Moro Reflex, we saw motion sickness. Here we see poor sense of balance, and we will see that a lot. Dislike of sports, especially upper body sports. Visual problems. The inability to, say, cross eyes or to easily see distance to near, distance to near. And this is obviously important for copying off the board, but it's also important for just reading a book. So if you have a book and it's laying flat on the table, all right, this part is further away than here. And so the ability to focus here versus here is called convergence. And for somebody who has a very strong convergence issue, this is uncomfortable. Their eyes will blink and they rub their eyes, they're red, they'll avoid, okay? They're looking off and then they'll come back because it hurts, okay? And so that's why a lot of the children that we're talking about with dyslexia will also have the accommodation of being able to read, the accommodation to not have to copy off the board, right? Another thing that's good for them is a slant board. But we don't want this to occur for the rest of their lives because someday they're going to want to drive. And when you drive, you need to be able to adjust your field of focus for distance, for being able to look at your inside of your car, your dashboard, but also to follow as cars come closer and closer and closer so you don't hit them. It's a really important skill developmentally but for the rest of our lives that we want to fix. And so by integrating the tonic labyrinthine reflex, this is one of the ways, and it's developmentally getting it all started. Next is spatial problems. And this could be the space between words, whether we're reading them so that the words are far enough apart, or whether we're writing them and understanding space and knowing where to move our pencil to. It's also when we're writing and we get to the end of a page, do we not feel the space of that end of the page and have to like squish in the word before going to the next line, okay? When we're making posters, is all the information squished into a corner because we don't understand space, okay? Poor sequencing skills, which we already talked about, and a poor sense of time. And this sense of time is even like understanding the difference between yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The words day, week, month, year, they're just words if we don't understand the passage of time, which is all it's sequencing. So that's tonic labyrinthine reflex. Next is spinal galant. I love this one. So spinal galant, I think, was one of my biggest issues, although my biggest was actually tonic labyrinthine reflex. I actually had very poor upper body strength. And after years of working on this, I'm much better. So spinal galant, this has a lot to do with reading, and especially, well, let me go through it and I'll explain. So this is also the ADHD one, so that if you've got a child who's both ADHD and dyslexia, you're probably looking at a very strongly retained spinal galant. The first symptom is fidgeting. You know, the child who cannot sit still, gotta move, on the move. Another one is bedwetting, past, you know, the appropriate age when they should have gotten through that. Doesn't mean that they still bedwet now. And that does bring up, I just want to mention, very few people have every one of these symptoms. What we're looking for is a cluster of symptoms that would say, they've got 2 or 3 or more, so we definitely have to work on this. It's when you see nothing, it's like, oh, no, that's not my child at all, then you can say, all right, maybe they have it integrated. So that's like bedwetting, you know, maybe they did a while ago, they don't know, whatever. Next is poor concentration. And this type of attention problem is not being able to concentrate on a single thing for a long period of time because like thoughts keep coming in here and there, and so you can't stay on a single task for a long period of time. That would be poor concentration. Next is poor short-term memory, right? This would be, especially your child, where you say, okay, you're getting ready for school. I want you to go upstairs, brush your teeth, use the bathroom, get changed, and as soon as you're done, come on down. Well, you just gave them 4 or 5 directions, and they walk upstairs and they're like, what was I supposed to do? Okay, they can't remember it because you gave them too many directions. So short-term memory, actually the best is average for a child who is 7 years old or over, or anybody who is 7 years old or over, is to have a short-term memory of 7 items. We should actually be able to remember 7 items. So, you know, when we've got a child who's got these issues, we can say, oh, okay, it's a short-term memory issue, and probably combined with that concentration and attention issue as well. So, and we need to have short-term memory in order to build long-term memory and build good working memory. Next is auditory processing problems. So this leads right into auditory dyslexia. So if you have an auditory processing problem, it can be things like not being able to hear the difference between the short vowel sounds. A, I, and all sound like okay? We can't hear the difference. They're too similar. Also, the difference between the sounds that come from the letters S, F, SH, and CH. All sounds like, okay? So, also along with auditory processing problems is auditory memory and auditory sequencing and several other things. But the most important, especially for being able to sound out words, is to be able to distinguish between the difference in the sounds. So that's that one. We also see sensory integration problems. So we have sensory integration means that several of their senses is off, and so auditory and vision are two of the senses, and you know, we've got taste and smell and taste, smell, and feeling. So touch, yes. And so, but the two that lead right into that dyslexia are the auditory and the visual. And so the next one I have here is near focusing problems. Being able to focus on a piece of paper or a book that is near as opposed to in the distance. And what's really interesting is that I've had several parents come in, their child's wearing glasses, and they mentioned to me that their child had been in special reading classes. And then like at around second grade, somebody mentions to the mom, have you had your child's eyes checked? And the mom's like, no, should I? And they go, and sure enough, the child needs glasses. Because it turns out that only in a couple states in the whole United States are children required to have near point acuity checked. The pediatrician checks for distance. The school nurse checks for distance, but they aren't checking for near point. And so of course it's going to make it difficult to read if your vision doesn't help you so that you can't see well right in front of you. So there you go. You can go have your child's eyes checked if you haven't already. And so the last one here is difficulty with reading. And it's like, well, sure. What if a child is, you know, trying to read a book and, you know, they get to the age where the letters are no longer large, they're quite small. You know, that could be the difference. But also, if they have an auditory problem, how are they going to read the word fish? They don't know what sound the F makes. They don't know what sound the I makes. And they don't know what sound the SH makes. Makes it very, very difficult. So you can see why I really like Spinal Galant. Every single person who has come to me for reading problems has had retained primitive reflexes, and they almost all had a retained Spinal Galant. The really cool thing is that was one of the ones that integrates like really well within the 30 days. So that's good news. Our next one is asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, or ATNR. This is the dyslexia dysgraphia reflex, and you'll see why in a minute. So the very first thing is visual problems, especially as we had talked about before, the convergence issue, distance to near and distance to near. This one also includes balance issues, which we've talked about before, and then a whole bunch that are all related. We've got right-left confusion, difficulty skipping and marching, difficulty crossing the midline, mixed dominance. Here we're talking about hand dominance and foot dominance, but also eye dominance and ear dominance. And visual perceptual difficulties, such as reversals of B's and D's, U's and N's, and saw and was, okay? The old definition of dyslexia. So, so let's talk about, because there are a couple more here, but let's talk about, because this has so much to do with dyslexia, what's going on with these. So our left hemisphere controls the right side of our body, and our right hemisphere controls the left side of our body. And so if we want to march correctly, we use one hand and the opposite leg, and then the other hand and the opposite leg, okay? So if we are using opposite sides of the body, we need to use both hemispheres of the brain, okay? Does that make sense? Okay. When we're born, our brain is not developed well. And through certain stages of development, we develop a part of the brain that's right here called the corpus callosum. This is the connector and the communicator between the two hemispheres of our body. A really easy way to see if somebody has not developed a very good corpus callosum is to have them march. And if they do what I call the puppet march, where it's right hand, right leg, and then left hand, left leg, and this is how they march, okay, then you know that they have an issue here. The correct way to skip is to balance with the opposite leg, opposite arm. And kids who can't really do a good skip, they might gallop, okay, or do big steps or something like that. They just have a really hard time with that. So that's one way of seeing whether or not they have this issue. But this particular stage of development goes back to combat crawl. And so if your child skipped all types of crawling, chances are they have this issue. And it's actually been known and discussed for decades that if you didn't crawl, you may have reading problems. This is why. Okay. So, so the way to deal with that, there are two things. One is to do a lot of activities that use both sides of the body at the same time. Okay. And the other is to integrate the ATNR. And this is one that may take 6 months. Okay, and that would be the reason why you would do the Maintaining Brains DVD for a full 6 months rather than just that 30 days, is to make sure that this gets taken care of. The last two symptoms with the ATNR have to do with writing. One is poor handwriting, and then the other one is poor expression of ideas on paper. And because we're really concentrating on dyslexia and not dysgraphia today, I'm going to bypass that because it's a really long explanation as to why, but it's fun. And there are some videos online that I think I've shown just why. So those free videos at the YouTube site. Okay, so the next one.
And we'll link those videos as well for those who are interested.
Okay, yeah, just if you want to share the channel, which would be youtube.com/pyramid of potential. There are a lot of free videos there with lots of information. So, okay, thank you. Okay, we've got two more reflexes. The next one, it's Symmetrical Tonic Neck Reflex, STNR, Symmetrical Tonic Neck Reflex. And even though it's lumped in here with the primitive reflexes, it's actually called a postural reflex, because all of the others emerge in utero, okay, while the baby's still, in mom, and then they get normally integrated later. Whereas this particular one doesn't actually emerge until a few of the others have integrated. So while you're doing your reflex integration exercises, if you see some regression after, say, 3 to 4 weeks, and you're getting concerned because they were doing well and then they regress, what you're seeing is that the STNR has emerged.
That's interesting.
Let's take a look at what this shows, what the symptoms are of a retained STNR. First is poor posture again. Okay, because this comes up after crawling. If somebody didn't do their crawling phase, chances are they also didn't spend enough time on their tummies, and so that their tonic labyrinthine reflex is probably still present. So they may have an ape-like walk. They have a W leg position while sitting on the floor. So this is not crisscross applesauce. This is instead where they kind of sit on their knees, but their legs are splayed out behind them. Their feet are splayed out behind them so that their legs make a W on the floor. They may have poor eye-hand coordination. Might be a messy eater, okay? Because this has an awful lot to do with wherever the head and the arms and the legs are positioned. They have to do with each other. So if the head is up, the arms are up and the legs are bent. But if the head is down, the arms are bent and the legs are straight. So it's a very funny kind of one, and it has a lot to do with coordination. And so if you have a athlete and he's going through this, he may have, a few weeks where he loses his coordination. Keep at it, because it's very important to finish, to get through this. We may see tracking problems. Okay, so tracking comes up with the last one, ATNR, and this one, STNR. So let me show you what tracking is. Tracking is the ability to follow a moving object with only your eyes smoothly. So with ATNR, it's the ability to smoothly follow, okay, from side to side, a horizontal tracking. Whereas with STNR, it's a vertical tracking, up and down. So what you'll see if your child has one of these tracking issues is when they're reading across a line, okay, do they jump over words or parts of words as they're reading out loud? That would be horizontal. If they get to the end of a line and then skip over a line or repeat the same line, then they have a vertical tracking issue, okay? And so one of the ways, there are more, but one of the ways to deal with this is to integrate the ATNR and the STNR. STNR also includes convergence problems, the near distance to near, distance to near. It also includes near focusing issues, which came up with Spinal Galant. So you can see through these reflexes, there's a lot of visual issues, and there's quite a few auditory issues. So important for reading. Let's see, we've got slow with copying tasks. That's the near to far. And then a couple other things. Difficulty learning to swim, okay? And that's because of the coordination issue. And then finally, attention. And somebody who had gone through reflex integration with me, and the only one that was not integrated was this particular one. And I wanted to know what was going on in her brain, because in the beginning she had terrible attention, could not pay attention. Parents had to pull her out of school and homeschool her in order for her to be able to learn. And they did this reflex integration. And yet they came back and said, all right, she's still not paying attention. What's up? And so I asked her all about it. And she was at an age where she could really tell me. And she said at first she could pay attention to nothing. So it's much, much better. But she said, she's now back in school. And she would say, math is boring and I can't pay attention. So this is somebody who can only pay attention when it's exciting and interesting and has a lot to do with them. And there are people who can pay attention to boring things and take their notes and get through class. They're the ones with the integrated STNR. And the ones who their mind wanders when it's not interesting, they're the ones who have the retained STNR. Last one is the Palmar reflex. And so this has to do with the hands. And when just a little explanation as to what it looks like when a baby is first born, a child is first born, their thumb is inside their fist, but then it soon comes out, but they have a strong fist, and eventually their hand opens and their fingers separate, okay? So that eventually they can pick things up just with 2 fingers. Now this doesn't seem to have a whole lot to do with dyslexia, but actually it does. There is a piece of this. Let me talk about what are the symptoms. The first one is poor handwriting and poor manual dexterity, and you can see how that's related to this strong fist. And they might have a poor pencil grip and stuff like that. But the next one is important. They may have speech and articulation issues. Therefore, it relates to language, okay? So what happens is when a baby is born, their mouth is attached to their hands, so that whatever their mouth does, their hand does too. And so as a parent, you can probably remember that when the baby is nursing or drinking from a bottle, the hands are going like that, okay? Whatever the mouth is doing, the hands do. And perhaps you know that if your child was like this and still has these issues, maybe you taught your child how to use scissors, and as they use the scissors, their mouth goes. All right, so that's a retained Palmar reflex. What's interesting is that inside the mouth is where a lot of our language comes from, okay? The way we form our mouth and use our tongue. So if we cannot control our tongue when we're doing something else with our hands, all right, it means when we're writing, our mouth might be, or we might stop our mouth from moving by, okay? So a lot of you are laughing because you know what I'm talking about. Well, this also has to do with lisps and speech impediments. So by going through the reflex integration exercise, you'll actually probably see a change. And I've had speech and language pathologists write me and say how it just happened like overnight, and parents too, that one day the child had a lisp and the next day they basically didn't. And this is because of the brain and how it makes new connections and how suddenly that connection is strong enough to flip over to a new way of processing. So those are the 6 reflexes. And what would you like to ask or say to me?
So thank you so much. This was really informative. So how are the exercises on the video? Can you explain that a little bit? You said it's 15 minutes. So what do the children and the families, if they want to participate, what do they do?
Okay, so you start up the video, okay, and you follow along with me. And because the first time you watch, you don't know exactly what I'm doing, there's a booklet inside. Oh, I don't have one inside of this. I do have the video, but I don't have the booklet right here. But there's a booklet that includes all the steps so that you can watch the first time, watch the video and follow the steps. The exercises are all done to a metronome. There is a reason they are. The metronome has a lot to do with the brain and working on the temporal lobes. The temporal lobes have a lot to do with language, and it just is bringing so many things together that it works a little bit better than not using the metronome. So there's an introduction, there's some instructions in separate videos on that DVD, and then there's a beginner level and an advanced level. The beginner level is because some people are not coordinated or strong enough to do the exercises on the advanced level. So you do those beginner level until you have the strength and the coordination to move over to the advanced. So it's actually, I'm the model. You just follow along with me and do what I do. That's it.
That seems great. Sounds great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, Kathy. So I'll include the links in the page, and if anybody has questions, they can reach out to you directly, or they can maybe leave comments and we'll get them to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed talking to you, everybody. So you just have a really good summit. Learn lots. Help those kids, because that's why we're here. It's all about them.
That's right. Thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.